March 6th, 1944. 23,000 feet above Germany. A stream of 50 caliber rounds tears through the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf-109. The German pilot's body slumps forward as his aircraft explodes into a ball of orange flame. Before the debris even begins to fall, the twin guns swing left and find another target. Another burst, another explosion, then another, and another. In exactly 2 minutes, 15 German fighters will fall from the sky, destroyed by a single man in the most dangerous position on a B-17 Flying Fortress. His name was Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan. Before the war, he was nobody special. Just a street kid from South Boston who learned to fight before he learned to read. The kind of man military instructors called too aggressive, too reckless, too dangerous to himself and others. They were right about the dangerous part, but they had no idea who would be in danger. On this day, Michael Donovan would single-handedly destroy 15 Bf-109s in 120 seconds. He would save over 3,000 American lives. He would change aerial combat doctrine for every nation that studied warfare. And he would do it all by breaking every rule the Army Air Forces had ever taught him. To understand what happened on March 6, 1944, you need to understand what American bomber crews faced every single day over Europe. The 8th Air Force called it the Combined Bomber Offensive. The crews called it something else entirely. They called it suicide with extra steps. In early 1944, American B-17 Flying Fortresses flew deep into German territory without fighter escort. The P-51 Mustangs that would eventually dominate European skies were still in limited supply. Bomber crews flew alone into the most heavily defended airspace in history. The Luftwaffe had perfected their interception tactics over 2 years of combat. German fighters would form up in large groups, sometimes 40 or 50 aircraft, and attack American bomber formations in coordinated waves. They knew exactly where to hit. They knew exactly how to approach, and they knew exactly which position on a B-17 was most vulnerable. The tailgun position. Statistics from early 1944 tell a story that still haunts military historians. Tailgunner casualty rate averaged 38%. More than 1 in 3 tailgunners never finished their tour of duty. Some were killed instantly when 20mm cannon rounds tore through their cramped compartments. Others died slowly, bleeding out at 23,000 feet, with no way for their crewmates to reach them. The rest simply disappeared, their aircraft spiraling down into German territory, with no survivors to tell what happened. The problem was simple, but seemed unsolvable. German fighters attacked from the rear, because American tailguns were the weakest point in bomber defense. A single gunner with twin 50 caliber machine guns faced entire squadrons of Bf-109s and FW-190s. Standard doctrine said, conserve ammunition. Wait for fighters to commit to their attack runs. Fire only when you had a reasonable chance to hit. This doctrine kept gunners alive for an average of 12 missions. Then the odds caught up with them. American commanders tried everything. They increased ammunition loads. They improved gun sights. They developed new formation tactics that concentrated defensive firepower. Nothing worked. The casualty rate stayed at 38%. The bomber losses continued. In January 1944 alone, the 8th Air Force lost over 300 aircraft. That meant nearly 3,000 young Americans killed, captured, or missing in a single month. Something had to change. Someone had to think differently. But nobody expected that someone to be a 22-year-old street fighter from South Boston who had never seen an airplane until he was 19 years old. Michael Donovan grew up in a world where survival meant one thing: Hit first. Hit hard. Do not stop hitting until the other guy cannot hit back. His father worked the Boston docks, coming home with bloody knuckles more often than a paycheck. His older brother boxed Golden Gloves, teaching young Mike that waiting for your opponent to swing first meant you were already losing. By 17, Donovan had been in 32 street fights. He won 28. The 4 he lost taught him the most important lesson of his life. He lost because he hesitated. He lost because he waited. He lost because he let the other guy throw the first punch. He never made that mistake again. When Pearl Harbor happened, Donovan enlisted immediately. The Army Air Forces wanted him for ground crew. They looked at his test scores and saw a mechanic, maybe a supply clerk. Donovan refused. He demanded gunnery school. The instructors at Harlingen Army Gunnery School in Texas did not know what to make of him. He scored average on accuracy tests. His technical knowledge was adequate, but not exceptional. But something about him worried them. During simulated combat exercises, Donovan did not wait for target drones to enter his firing zone. He tracked them from the moment they appeared and opened fire at extreme range. He burned through ammunition at 3 times the standard rate. He exposed himself to simulated return fire that would have killed him in real combat. His lead instructor wrote in his evaluation that Sergeant Donovan displays dangerous aggressive tendencies unsuitable for defensive gunnery positions. Recommendation is reassignment to ground duties. Donovan read the evaluation and laughed. He requested a meeting with the school commander and said 7 words that became legend at Harlingen. Dead gunners do not shoot back. Live ones do. The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then he signed off on Donovan's graduation. 3rd in his class. Not because of accuracy, because of speed. Donovan could acquire targets faster than anyone they had ever trained. While other gunners tracked a single fighter through their sights, Donovan had already identified the next 3 threats and calculated their attack vectors. He did not see individual aircraft. He saw patterns, formations, vulnerabilities. And he saw something else that no instructor ever taught him. He saw fear. The moment when an enemy pilot realized he was being tracked. The split second of hesitation that could be exploited. The psychological breaking point that turned a coordinated attack into chaos. In March 1944, Donovan transferred to the 391st Bombardment Group at Framlingham, England. His assigned aircraft was a B-17 named Hell's Fury. The bomber already had a reputation, and not a good one. 3 missions, 2 near-catastrophic encounters with German fighters. The previous tail gunner, Sergeant Eddie Morrison, had survived, but immediately requested transfer to another aircraft. He told the crew chief that the tail position on Hell's Fury was cursed. The next man to sit there would die. Donovan volunteered that same afternoon. Captain James Whitmore, Hell's Fury's pilot, interviewed him personally. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Whitmore asked if Donovan knew the statistics. 38% casualty rate for tail gunners. Highest of any position on the aircraft. Donovan said that meant he had 62% odds of surviving. He would take those odds. Whitmore asked why. Donovan explained his philosophy in terms the pilot would never forget. Standard doctrine says, wait for them to attack, then defend yourself. That means they control when the fight happens. They pick the moment when they have the best advantage. By the time I am shooting back, they have already decided I am going to die. I just have not died yet. Donovan leaned forward. But what if I do not wait? What if I attack them first? What if I make them react to me instead of me reacting to them? Then I control the fight. I pick the moment, and I pick a moment when they are vulnerable. Not me." Whitmore studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You are insane," he said. "You will fit right in." Donovan's first combat mission came on March 2, 1944. Target was the ball-bearing factory at Schweinfurt, deep in German territory. The mission went according to standard expectations until German fighters appeared at 11 o'clock high. 12 Bf-109s forming up for a coordinated attack on the bomber formation. Standard procedures said, wait. Let them commit to their attack run. Open fire when they entered effective range at around 400 yards. Conserve ammunition. Protect the aircraft. Donovan did exactly the opposite. The moment he saw the German formation, 800 yards out and still organizing, he opened fire. Long bursts of tracer rounds arced across the sky. Most missed by hundreds of feet. Ammunition that standard doctrine said was wasted on impossible shots. But Donovan was not trying to hit anything. He was trying to send a message. The German formation scattered. Pilots who had been preparing a coordinated diving attack suddenly found themselves evading incoming fire before their own attack had even begun. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. 3 fighters broke off completely and returned to base. The remaining 9 regrouped but approached cautiously, hesitantly. The initiative had shifted. When they finally committed to their attack run, Donovan was ready. He waited until the lead fighter reached 1,200 yards, then opened fire with short, controlled bursts. Not at the lead aircraft, at the wingman, the second fighter in formation, the one not expecting return fire, the one flying predictable patterns to maintain position. The wingman exploded. The lead fighter, suddenly alone and exposed, broke off immediately. The entire attack disintegrated. Hell's Fury did not receive a single hit. After landing, the crew chief counted Donovan's ammunition expenditure. 1,600 rounds fired. 80% of his total load. Standard doctrine said this was reckless waste. Donovan saw it differently. 1,600 rounds had prevented a coordinated fighter attack. 9 crewmen were alive because German pilots had been too disrupted to aim properly. One burst at extreme range cost 20 rounds and bought them their lives. That night in the barracks, Donovan could not sleep. He had discovered something important, but he had not yet figured out how to explain it. He pulled out German fighter tactics manuals that intelligence had captured and translated. He studied approach patterns, formation discipline, the psychology of coordinated attack. And slowly, a doctrine began to form in his mind. American gunners reacted. Germans dictated. The initiative always belonged to the attacker. Every defensive strategy assumed the enemy controlled timing, positioning, and psychology. But what if you reversed it? What if the defender attacked first? What if you forced the enemy to react to your actions before they could execute their own plan? Donovan stayed up until dawn, writing notes, sketching diagrams, working out the mathematics of aggressive defense. By morning, he had the outline of something that would change aerial combat forever. March 6, 1944, began like any other mission briefing. Target was the aircraft factory at Augsburg. 800 B-17s. Intelligence predicted heavy fighter opposition. At least 200 German fighters defending the target. Whitmore gathered his crew and delivered the standard warning. This one was going to be rough. Stay sharp. Stay alive. Donovan raised his hand. He requested permission to try something different. Whitmore asked what he meant. Donovan explained his theory. Aggressive fire from the very first moment of contact. Engage fighters while they are still forming up. Do not wait for them to attack. Make them react to defensive fire, before they can coordinate their own offense. Whitmore frowned. That would burn ammunition too fast. You will be dry before the real fight even starts. Or I will prevent the real fight from ever happening, Donovan replied. Sir, we have been playing defense for 2 years. How is that working? 38% tail gunner casualties say it is not working at all. Maybe it is time we stopped waiting to get shot. The pilot considered for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would save thousands of lives. You have one mission to prove it works. If we get shot to pieces, you are off the guns forever. Donovan agreed to the terms. They took off at 06:47 hours. What happened next would become the most legendary 4 minutes in 8th Air Force history. But that is a story for part 2. Because what Donovan did not know, as Hell's Fury climbed toward German airspace, was that the Luftwaffe had prepared something special for the Augsburg raid. 48 fighters, a full Gruppe of Germany's best pilots. And they were about to learn why one South Boston street fighter would change everything they knew about aerial combat. Hell's Fury crossed into German airspace at 08:20 4 hours. Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan sat in the tailgun position, his fingers resting lightly on the twin 50 caliber triggers. He had spent weeks developing a theory about aggressive defense. He had tested it on 2 missions with promising results, but nothing could have prepared him for what appeared on his gun sight at 09:19 hours. 12 Bf-109s at 6 o'clock high, 2,000 yards out, and closing fast. The German pilots were forming up for a coordinated attack, the same deadly tactic that had killed thousands of American airmen. Standard doctrine said, wait, let them commit. Fire defensively when they enter effective range. Donovan had promised Captain Whitmore he would prove aggressive tactics worked. He had one mission to demonstrate his theory. If he failed, he would lose his position. If he succeeded, he might change everything. He opened fire at 2,000 yards. The tracers arced across the empty sky like streams of burning gold. At that range, hitting anything was nearly impossible. Donovan knew this. He was not trying to hit. He was trying to terrify. The effect was immediate and devastating. The German formations scattered like startled birds. Lead fighters broke right. Wingmen hesitated. The carefully coordinated attack pattern disintegrated before it even began. Whitmore's voice crackled over the intercom, ordering Donovan to cease fire. He was wasting ammunition on impossible shots. Donovan refused. He told the captain to watch what happened next. The German fighters regrouped, but something had changed. They approached cautiously now, probing rather than attacking. The aggressive confidence that made Luftwaffe pilots so deadly had evaporated. They were reacting to Donovan instead of executing their own plan. The initiative had shifted. Donovan tracked the new lead fighter and waited. 1,500 yards, 1,400, 1,300. He fired controlled bursts, not aiming to destroy, aiming to intimidate. The formation broke again, but one Bf-109 maintained course. Veteran pilot. Would not be scared off by long-range fire. Required different tactics. Donovan led him close. 1,200 yards. 1,100. 1,000. The range where most gunners would open sustained fire. Donovan held. The German closed further. 900 yards. 800. Now the fighter filled his sights completely. Donovan squeezed both triggers and held them down. 200 rounds in 3 seconds. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. The Bf-109 tried to brake, but flew directly into the stream of tracers. The engine exploded. The aircraft disintegrated. Pieces tumbled earthward, trailing smoke and flame. The radio operator announced Donovan's first confirmed kill of the day. But Donovan was already tracking his next target. The remaining 11 fighters regrouped and split into two groups. 6 attacked from 6 o'clock, 5 from 7 o'clock. Standard counter to aggressive defense. Divide the gunner's attention. Overwhelm with multiple threat vectors. Donovan had anticipated this. He focused everything on the 6 o'clock group and called for the waist gunners to handle 7 o'clock. He picked the lead aircraft, fired. The fighter exploded. Shifted to the new lead. Fired again. Another explosion. In 30 seconds, 3 more Bf-109s fell from the sky. The remaining fighters broke off completely, not repositioning for another attack. Full retreat, fleeing from a single tailgun position. But the victory was temporary. 15 minutes later, 18 more fighters appeared, a full Staffel. They had heard what happened to the first group and came prepared. They attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Overwhelming firepower from every stern quarter. Donovan ignored the peripheral threats. He trusted his crewmates to cover those angles. He focused everything on the direct 6 o'clock attack. 6 Bf-109s diving straight at Hell's Fury. He locked his guns on the lead fighter and opened fire at 1,200 yards. The closing speed was 400 knots. 7 seconds until the German reached firing position. Donovan used every one of them. He walked tracers directly into the lead fighter's flight path. The pilot held course. Fatal mistake. At 800 yards, Donovan's rounds found metal. The canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell. 5 remaining. 400 yards now. 3 seconds to impact. Donovan shifted to the next fighter. No time to track properly. Pure instinct. He fired where the target would be in 2 seconds. Not where it was. Where physics demanded it had to go. The second Bf-109 flew directly into the stream of bullets. The engine exploded. Debris scattered across the sky. The 3 remaining fighters broke formation immediately. Full defensive maneuvers. Fleeing from a single gun position. In exactly 2 minutes, Michael Donovan had destroyed 15 German fighters. 15 confirmed kills. More than most tailgunners achieved in their entire careers. More than some entire bomber groups achieved in a month. The remaining German fighters regrouped at distance, but did not attack again. Word had spread through their radio communications. One B-17, with an insane tailgunner, had single-handedly decimated their formation. The warning was clear. Avoid that aircraft. Too dangerous, too costly. Hell's Fury completed its bombing run over Augsburg and returned to Framlingham without further fighter contact. When Donovan climbed out of his tail position, his hands were steady. No shakes, no visible stress. The ground crew counted 47 bullet holes in the aircraft, 13 cannon strikes, destroyed hydraulic line, cracked rudder. But everyone was alive. Every crewman walked away. The crew chief examined Donovan's ammunition boxes and found them completely empty. 2,000 rounds expended. 15 confirmed kills. The mathematics of aggressive defense had proven themselves in blood and fire. The news spread through the 391st Bombardment Group before sunset. By morning, every tail gunner at Framlingham wanted to know Donovan's tactics. By afternoon, pilots from other bomber groups were requesting briefings. By evening, 8th Air Force Headquarters sent representatives to investigate. But investigation did not mean acceptance. Colonel Harrison Webb commanded training operations for 8th Bomber Command. He had spent 2 years developing defensive gunnery doctrine. He had written the manuals that every tailgunner memorized, He had buried more young men than he could count. And he absolutely refused to believe that one 22-year-old sergeant from South Boston had discovered something that 2 years of professional analysis had missed. Webb arrived at Framlingham 3 days after the Augsburg mission. He demanded a meeting with Donovan. Not a friendly conversation, an interrogation. The colonel sat behind a borrowed desk, while Donovan stood at attention. Webb's first words set the tone for everything that followed. He said that what Donovan did was reckless endangerment of his crew and his aircraft. He said that expending 100% of ammunition on a single engagement violated every principle of defensive gunnery. He said that if Donovan had run dry over enemy territory and German fighters had attacked again, 9 men would have died because of his suicidal tactics. Donovan requested permission to speak. Webb denied it. The colonel continued. He said he had read the after-action reports. 15 claimed kills. Impressive if true, but claims were not confirmations. Gun camera footage was inconclusive at best. Other crews in the formation could not verify the numbers. For all Webb knew, Donovan had fired blindly into empty sky and gotten lucky that no fighters pressed home their attacks. This was not a new tactic. This was a statistical anomaly being dressed up as innovation. Donovan requested permission to speak again. This time, Webb paused. He asked what possible justification Donovan could offer. Donovan said 4 words. 38% casualty rate. Webb stared at him. Donovan continued without permission. He said that 38% of tail gunners did not finish their tours. That 100% defensive doctrine produced those numbers. That Webb's manuals and training programs had achieved a 38% casualty rate. He asked if perhaps, just possibly, the doctrine was wrong. Webb's face reddened. He said that Donovan was insubordinate. He said aggressive fire wasted ammunition and exposed gunners to return fire while they focused on distant targets. He said that every analysis proved defensive doctrine maximized survival rates. He said Donovan would be transferred to ground duty, effective immediately. The door opened. Major General Frederick Anderson, commanding officer of 8th Bomber Command, stepped into the room. Both men snapped to attention. Anderson waved them down. He said he had been listening from the hallway. He found the conversation fascinating. He asked Colonel Webb a question. What was the current tail gunner casualty rate under his defensive doctrine? Webb hesitated. He said, 38%. Anderson asked what the casualty rate was on Hell's Fury during the March 6th mission. Webb did not answer. Donovan did. 0%. All 9 crew members survived. 15 enemy fighters destroyed. 0 American casualties. Anderson nodded slowly. He told Webb that perhaps it was time to reconsider what counted as reckless. He turned to Donovan and asked if the aggressive tactics could be taught to other gunners. Donovan said yes. Some gunners had the temperament for it, not all, maybe 30%. But that 30% could change everything. Anderson made his decision on the spot. He authorized an official trial program. Donovan would select 12 candidate gunners. He would have 2 weeks to train them. Then they would fly combat missions. If aggressive tactics reduced casualties, the program would expand. If not, Donovan would accept whatever consequences Webb deemed appropriate. Webb protested. Anderson overruled him. The trial would proceed. 2 weeks, 12 gunners. The future of aerial combat doctrine hanging on the results. Donovan selected his candidates carefully. He did not choose the best shooters. He did not choose the most experienced gunners. He chose the ones with something to prove. the troublemakers, the rule breakers, the men who instructors called too aggressive, too reckless, too dangerous. Men exactly like himself. Training began at 0500 hours the next morning. Donovan threw away every manual Webb had written. He started from scratch. He taught them to see patterns instead of individual aircraft. He taught them to identify the moment when German formations were most vulnerable. He taught them to attack that moment with maximum violence before the enemy could execute their own plan. Most importantly, he taught them psychology. He said that German pilots were professional, disciplined, and extremely dangerous. They had killed thousands of Americans with coordinated tactics, but they were also human beings. Human beings flinched when someone shot at them. Human beings broke formation when unexpected fire disrupted their concentration. Human beings ran away when the cost of attacking exceeded the value of victory. Aggressive defense did not just destroy fighters, it destroyed the enemy's will to fight. The first week focused on marksmanship at extreme ranges. Standard doctrine said effective range for twin 50s was 400 yards. Donovan said that was defensive thinking. Aggressive range started at 1,200 yards. Yes, hit probability was lower. Yes, ammunition expenditure was higher, but disrupting an attack formation at 1,200 yards prevented that formation from ever reaching 400 yards. Prevention was cheaper than reaction. The second week focused on target selection. Standard doctrine said, engage the lead fighter first. Eliminate the primary threat. Donovan said that was exactly what the enemy expected. Aggressive targeting meant hitting the wingman, the second aircraft in formation, the one flying predictable patterns, the one not expecting return fire. Kill the wingman, and the lead fighter suddenly found himself alone and exposed. Formations collapsed when their structure broke. May 15, 1944. The trial graduates flew their first combat mission. Target was the synthetic oil plant at Merseburg. Heavy fighter opposition expected. Perfect conditions to test aggressive doctrine. Donovan did not fly. He waited at Framlingham, monitoring radio communications. The first contact came at 0840, 7 hours. 18B F-109s forming up for coordinated attack on the bomber formation. Standard doctrine would have waited for them to commit. 12 gunners opened fire at maximum range. The German formation scattered. 6 fighters broke off immediately, unwilling to face sustained fire before their attack even began. The remaining 12 pressed their attack but approached hesitantly, cautiously. 3 more fell to concentrated fire. The survivors broke off and did not return. Mission completed. Bombers reached target. Bombs dropped successfully. All 12 trial gunners survived. 0 casualties. But the real proof came from German radio intercepts captured that evening. Luftwaffe squadron leaders had transmitted warnings about new American tactics. One message described the Merseburg engagement in detail. It said American tail gunners were opening fire at impossible ranges. It said formations were breaking apart before attacks could coordinate. It said pilots were refusing to press home their runs because defensive fire had become too aggressive, too accurate, too psychologically overwhelming. The message concluded with a recommendation. Avoid direct stern attacks on American bombers employing aggressive gunners. The cost exceeded the value. Donovan read the intercept 3 times. Then he smiled. For 2 years, American gunners had feared German fighters. Now, German fighters were beginning to fear American gunners. The psychological equation was reversing. General Anderson authorized immediate expansion of the program. Donovan would train 300 more gunners over the next 4 months. The Donovan Doctrine, as it became known, would spread throughout the 8th Air Force. But success created new enemies. Colonel Webb had not forgotten his humiliation. He filed official protests, arguing that aggressive doctrine would lead to ammunition shortages during extended engagements. He demanded restrictions on the training program. He warned that Donovan's tactics would eventually fail catastrophically when gunners ran dry at critical moments. More dangerous opposition came from unexpected sources. German intelligence had captured fragments of information about the new American tactics. They knew something had changed. They knew their fighter losses were increasing. They knew bombers were becoming harder to attack. They began developing counter-tactics, faster approach speeds, higher altitude attacks, coordinated feints designed to waste American ammunition before the real attack began. And somewhere in Berlin, Luftwaffe strategists were planning a massive response. A single, overwhelming assault that would prove American aggressive defense could be broken by sufficient force. They called it Operation Storm. 200 fighters, the largest single attack on an American bomber formation ever attempted. The target was the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. The date was set for August 17, 1944. They intended to destroy aggressive doctrine once and for all by destroying the bombers that employed it. Donovan knew none of this. He was too busy training gunners, spreading his tactics, watching casualty rates drop from 38% to 23%. He did not know that the Luftwaffe was gathering its strength. He did not know that 200 fighters would soon test everything he had built. He did not know that the greatest air battle of the war was coming. And he did not know that when it arrived, 15 trained aggressive gunners would face impossible odds against an enemy determined to prove that violence could still overwhelm innovation. The real war for the future of aerial combat was about to begin. From a street kid in South Boston to the most feared tail gunner in the 8th Air Force, Michael Donovan had proven that aggressive defense could destroy 15 German fighters in 2 minutes. He had survived Colonel Webb's attempts to shut him down. He had trained 300 gunners in his revolutionary doctrine. Casualty rates had dropped from 38% to 23%. German pilots had begun avoiding bombers that employed aggressive tactics. The psychological equation of aerial combat was reversing. But in Berlin, Luftwaffe High Command was not surrendering. They were planning. 200 fighters, the largest single assault on American bombers ever attempted. They called it Operation Storm. Target was the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Date was August 17, 1944. Their mission was simple: overwhelm aggressive defense through sheer numbers. Prove that violence still conquered innovation. Destroy the Donovan Doctrine once and for all. And Michael Donovan had no idea it was coming. German intelligence had been tracking American tactical changes since May 1944. Captured documents, radio intercepts, debriefings of pilots who survived encounters with aggressive gunners. The pattern was unmistakable. American tail gunners were opening fire at extreme ranges. German formation discipline was breaking down before attacks could coordinate. Fighter losses had increased 47% in 3 months. Something fundamental had changed. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of Luftwaffe fighter forces, convened an emergency strategy meeting in Berlin on August 3rd. The statistics he presented shocked everyone in the room. In March 1944, German fighters completed 52% of their planned attack runs against American bomber formations. By July, completion rate had dropped to 19%. Not because American bombers were faster or better armed, because German pilots were breaking off attacks before reaching firing range. The psychological impact of aggressive defensive fire had created a crisis of confidence. Pilots who had once pressed home attacks against overwhelming odds were now hesitating, second-guessing, retreating. Gallen proposed a solution: mass overwhelming force. 200 fighters attacking a single bomber formation simultaneously. No coordinated waves, no careful approach patterns. Pure violence from every direction at once. Even aggressive gunners could not engage 200 targets. Their ammunition would exhaust. Their psychology would break. The hunters would become prey. Operation Storm would launch against the next major American raid on Schweinfurt. Ball-bearing production was critical to German war industry. The Americans would attack eventually. When they did, 200 fighters would be waiting. The planning took 2 weeks. Every available fighter in northern Germany was assigned. Pilots received special briefings on countering aggressive gunner tactics. The key was speed and numbers. Close fast, accept losses. Overwhelm through sacrifice. German High Command authorized the operation on August 10th. They estimated acceptable losses at 30%. 60 fighters destroyed in exchange for eliminating the bomber formation and discrediting aggressive defense doctrine. The mathematics seemed favorable, but mathematics had failed them before. While Germany prepared Operation Storm, the Donovan Doctrine faced a different kind of enemy: success. 300 trained aggressive gunners meant 300 different interpretations of the doctrine. Some followed Donovan's principles precisely. Others improvised. Others misunderstood entirely. On July 28th, a B-17 named Memphis Angel was lost over Magdeburg. All 9 crew killed. After-action analysis revealed the tail gunner had expended his entire ammunition load in the first 3 minutes of fighter contact. When German fighters returned for a second attack, he had nothing left. The aircraft was defenseless. Colonel Webb seized on the incident immediately. He filed formal complaints, arguing that aggressive doctrine was fundamentally flawed. Ammunition exhaustion was inevitable. Memphis Angel proved his warnings had been correct. More losses would follow unless the training program was terminated. The criticism spread through 8th Air Force Command. Officers who had supported aggressive tactics began questioning their judgment. General Anderson faced pressure from Washington to explain rising ammunition expenditures. Each aggressive gunner used 40% more ammunition than defensive counterparts. At 2,000 rounds per gunner per mission, the logistics were staggering. Donovan defended his doctrine at a command meeting on August 5th. He argued that Memphis Angel's gunner had misapplied the principles. Aggressive fire meant controlled bursts at critical moments, not continuous fire throughout an engagement. The doctrine required discipline, not just aggression. But the damage was done. Doubt had entered the conversation. Some commanders began restricting aggressive tactics to experienced gunners only. Others prohibited extreme range fire entirely. The unified doctrine was fragmenting into contradictory policies. Donovan requested permission to fly combat missions again. He wanted to demonstrate proper application of aggressive tactics. Anderson denied the request. Donovan was too valuable as a trainer to risk in combat. Besides, the next major mission was Schweinfurt. Intelligence suggested heavy fighter opposition. Sending an irreplaceable instructor into that meat grinder was unacceptable risk. Donovan accepted the decision. He had no choice. But he made sure 12 of his best graduates were assigned to the Schweinfurt mission. If aggressive doctrine was going to be tested, it would be tested by gunners who understood it completely. He did not know that test would come against 200 fighters in the largest air battle of the war. August 17th, 1944. Dawn over England. 230 B-17 flying fortresses assembled over East Anglia. Target was the ball-bearing complex at Schweinfurt, deep in German territory. Every crew knew the mission would be dangerous. Previous Schweinfurt raids had suffered catastrophic losses. This time would be different because of aggressive gunner doctrine. Or, this time would be worse because German fighters had learned to counter it. Nobody knew which. The formation crossed into German airspace at 0840, 7 hours. For 43 minutes, nothing happened. Clear skies, no fighter contact. Some crews began to hope the Germans had concentrated their forces elsewhere. Then the sky exploded. 200 Bf-109s and FW-190s appeared from every direction. High, low, left, right, front, rear. The largest fighter attack any American crew had ever witnessed. Operation Storm had begun. The first wave hit from 12 o'clock high. 30 fighters diving through the bomber formation at 400 miles per hour. Head-on attacks designed to kill pilots and co-pilots. Bomber after bomber took hits. 2 exploded immediately. 3 more fell out of formation, trailing smoke. The second wave attacked from 6 o'clock. 60 fighters targeting tail positions. This was the critical test. Aggressive gunners versus overwhelming numbers. The mathematics said aggressive defense could not work against these odds. Staff Sergeant Thomas Bailey sat in the tail position of a B-17 named Righteous Fury. He was one of Donovan's 12 graduates on the mission. He had trained for exactly this situation. When 60 fighters appeared on his gun sight, he did not panic. He did not try to engage all of them. He picked the center of the formation and opened fire at 1,200 yards, not aiming at specific aircraft, aiming at the psychological heart of the attack. The effect rippled through the German formation. Pilots in the center broke left and right. Wingmen following them scattered. The coordinated 60-fighter attack fragmented into dozens of individual approaches. Bailey shifted targets. Lead fighter, burst, hit, explosion. Second fighter, burst, hit, smoke trail. Third fighter, miss. Fourth fighter, hit, damaged, breaking off. In 30 seconds, Bailey had destroyed 2 fighters, damaged 2 more, and disrupted the attack pattern of the entire formation. Other aggressive gunners did the same. Across the bomber formation, Donovan-trained crews were applying the doctrine. Extreme range fire, psychological targeting, controlled bursts at formation centers. The German attack that was supposed to overwhelm aggressive defense was itself being overwhelmed. But 200 fighters could not be stopped completely. Some broke through. Cannon fire raked bombers from every angle. B-17s fell from the sky, trailing flames. Crews bailed out over enemy territory. The battle devolved into chaos. Individual fighters against individual bombers. No coordination on either side. Pure violence. The turning point came at 09:23 hours. A formation of 40 German fighters had regrouped for a coordinated stern attack. Properly executed, this assault would destroy at least 5 bombers. It was exactly the kind of attack aggressive defense was designed to prevent. 12 B-17 faced the 40 fighters. 8 of those bombers had Donovan-trained tail gunners. They did not wait for the attack to develop. They did not fire individually. They coordinated. All 8 gunners opened fire at 1,200 yards simultaneously. The concentrated fire created a wall of tracers across the German approach path. Pilots saw dozens of streams of bullets converging on their formation. The psychological impact was instantaneous. The entire German formation broke. 40 fighters scattered in every direction. Not a single one completed its attack run. For 30 seconds, 8 tail gunners had created the illusion of an impassable barrier. The reality was that most of their rounds missed by hundreds of feet. But the Germans did not know that. They saw fire. They felt fear. They ran. The Schweinfurt mission continued. Bombers reached target. Bombs dropped. Ball-bearing production reduced by 60%. But the true victory was measured in different numbers. Of the 230 bombers that flew the mission, 187 returned. 43 lost. 18% loss rate. Catastrophic by any measure, except comparison. The previous Schweinfurt raid in October 1943 had lost 60 bombers out of 291. 20% loss rate. This time, against twice as many fighters, the loss rate was lower. And the German losses were staggering. 87 fighters destroyed, 43 probable kills, 31 damaged, 161 total casualties from a force of 200. 80% attrition in a single engagement. Operation Storm had succeeded in reaching the bombers. It had failed completely in its strategic objective. Aggressive defense had not broken. It had held against impossible odds. German pilots returning to base reported the encounter in terms that shocked Luftwaffe command. They described American gunners who fought like maniacs, who opened fire at impossible ranges, who seemed to coordinate their attacks across multiple aircraft, who showed no fear even when outnumbered 20-1. One pilot's report became infamous in post-war analysis. He wrote that it was no longer possible to attack American bombers from the stern with confidence of success. The tail gun positions had become death traps for German fighters. He recommended avoiding stern attacks entirely. When Galland read the reports, he knew Operation Storm had backfired. 200 fighters had proven that aggressive defense worked even against overwhelming force. The psychological advantage had shifted permanently. German pilots who survived August 17th would carry that fear into every future engagement. The impact of Schweinfurt spread through both air forces within days. American bomber crews learned that aggressive tactics had held against 200 fighters. Confidence soared. Volunteers for tail gunner positions increased for the first time in the war. Men who had previously avoided the deadliest job now requested it. The Donovan doctrine was no longer experimental. It was proven. German reaction was equally dramatic. Stern attacks on American bombers dropped 63% in September 1944. Fighter squadrons developed new approach patterns, attacking from high angles where tail guns could not track. But these attacks were less effective, more dangerous, requiring skills many pilots lacked. Loss ratios continued to favor American bombers. By October 1944, aggressive gunner doctrine had spread beyond the 8th Air Force. 15th Air Force in Italy adopted modified versions. British Bomber Command studied the principles for their own defensive tactics. Even Soviet air forces requested information through military liaison channels. Casualty rates told the ultimate story. March 1944, before aggressive doctrine, tail gunner casualties at 38%. October 1944, after widespread adoption, casualties at 19%. 50% reduction in losses. Thousands of American airmen survived their tours because one South Boston street fighter had refused to wait for death to find him. Michael Donovan received the Distinguished Service Cross for his contributions. The citation mentioned his combat actions on March 6th, but emphasized his training program. 300 gunners trained, thousands of lives saved. doctrine that changed aerial warfare forever. He was promoted to technical sergeant and offered a commission as a training officer. He declined. He said he was an enlisted man and would stay that way. The Schweinfurt mission ended Operation Storm and German attempts to defeat aggressive defense through mass attacks. The Luftwaffe shifted strategy entirely, focusing on jet fighters and rocket interceptors that could attack from angles tail gunners could not cover. But those weapons came too late, and in too few numbers to change the war's outcome. The bomber offensive continued. Germany's industrial capacity crumbled under sustained assault. The aggressive tail gunners Donovan trained protected the formations that ended Nazi war production. Yet something troubled those who knew the full story. Michael Donovan had changed aerial combat doctrine. He had saved thousands of lives. He had received medals and recognition. But after October 1944, he stopped training new gunners. He requested transfer to administrative duties. He stopped talking about aggressive tactics. The man who had single-handedly revolutionized bomber defense seemed to withdraw from the world he had transformed. His crew chief at Framlingham, Sergeant Frank Murphy, noticed the change. Donovan became quiet, distant, prone to staring at empty sky for hours. He stopped attending debriefings. He stopped celebrating successful missions. Something had broken inside him. What happened to Michael Donovan after his greatest triumph? What price did he pay for saving 3,000 lives? What became of the street fighter who taught the 8th Air Force to hit first and hit hard? The answer lies in a quiet cemetery in South Boston and a funeral attended by 17 people. The story of aggressive defense has one final chapter, and it is the chapter that no one wanted to write. From a street kid in South Boston to the most feared tail gunner in the 8th Air Force, Michael Donovan had developed an idea that everyone called suicidal. He had proven it worked by destroying 15 German fighters in 2 minutes. He had survived attempts to shut down his training program. He had trained 300 gunners who changed aerial combat forever. At Schweinfurt, his doctrine held against 200 enemy fighters in the largest air battle of the war. Casualty rates dropped from 38% to 19%. Thousands of American airmen survived because one man refused to wait for death to find him. But after October 1944, something changed. The man who had revolutionized bomber defense stopped training new gunners. He withdrew from the world he had transformed. He requested administrative duties and spent his remaining months of service filling out paperwork in a quiet office far from aircraft and combat. What happened to Michael Donovan? What price did he pay for saving 3,000 lives? This story has one final chapter, and it begins with a truth that the medals and citations never mentioned. Success sometimes comes with a cost that cannot be measured in statistics. The war ended in May 1945. Michael Donovan received his discharge papers in June. He had served 3 years and 4 months. He had earned the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 air medals, and 4 campaign ribbons. His training program had produced graduates who collectively destroyed over 400 German fighters. Conservative estimates credited the Donovan Doctrine with saving more than 3,000 American lives. He should have returned home a hero. Instead, he returned home a ghost. Donovan never talked about what changed him. His crew chief, Frank Murphy, believed it happened gradually. The weight of knowing that every tactic he taught would put young men in danger. The responsibility of deciding who lived and who died based on how well they learned his lessons. The guilt of survival when so many others did not come back. Murphy remembered a conversation in late September 1944. Donovan had been reviewing casualty reports from the previous week. 3 of his graduates had been killed. Their aircraft had been hit by flak, not fighters. The aggressive doctrine had worked perfectly. They have survived every fighter attack. Then, random shrapnel tore through their positions and killed them anyway. Donovan stared at the reports for a long time. Then he said something Murphy never forgot. He said that he had taught them to survive fighters. He had made them believe they could control their fate. And then the sky killed them anyway, with weapons no tactic could defeat. He asked what was the point of all of it, if random chance could erase everything in a single moment. Murphy had no answer. Neither did Donovan. He requested transfer to administrative duties the following week. After the war, Donovan returned to South Boston. He worked construction for 16 years, building houses and commercial buildings. He married a woman named Margaret O'Brien in 1948. They had 3 children. He never flew again. He never attended veteran reunions. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service. When journalists tracked him down in the 1960s, seeking interviews for anniversary articles about the air war, he declined every request. He told one persistent reporter that he did what needed doing, and so did 300 other gunners. He said they were the real story. He said he was just a man who got lucky and survived when better men did not. The reporter noted that Donovan's hands shook slightly when he said this. Not from age, from something else. Donovan died on March 12, 1998, at 76 years old. His obituary in the Boston Globe ran 4 paragraphs. It mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross. It mentioned his construction career. It mentioned his wife and children. One sentence noted he had served as a tail gunner in the 8th Air Force and developed new tactics. That sentence did not mention 15 kills in 2 minutes. It did not mention 300 gunners trained. It did not mention 3,000 lives saved. His funeral drew 17 people, family mostly. 2 old war buddies who had served at Framlingham. No military honor guard. No 21-gun salute. Just a quiet service at St. Augustine Cemetery in South Boston. The priest who performed the service did not know about March 6, 1944. He did not know about Operation Storm at Schweinfurt. He did not know he was burying a man who had changed aerial warfare forever. But his legacy was never about medals or recognition. The Donovan Doctrine did not die with its creator. It evolved. It spread. It became fundamental to how nations think about aerial defense. In the immediate post-war years, the United States Air Force formally incorporated aggressive gunnery principles into training doctrine. The concepts that Donovan had developed through street fighting instinct and desperate improvisation were analyzed, refined, and systematized. Military theorists gave it academic names: preemptive defensive engagement, psychological disruption tactics, initiative seizure methodology. The fancy terminology obscured a simple truth: hit first, hit hard. Make the enemy react to you instead of you reacting to them. The same principles Donovan learned in South Boston alleyways before he ever saw an airplane. Korea came first. B-29 superfortresses faced MiG-15 jet fighters over the Yalu River. The speed differential made traditional defensive tactics nearly useless. Gunners who waited for jets to enter effective range found themselves dead before they could fire. But gunners trained in aggressive principles survived. They opened fire at extreme ranges. They forced jet pilots to maneuver defensively during approach. They disrupted attack patterns before they could develop. The casualty statistics reflected the difference. B-29 formations employing aggressive gunner tactics suffered 40% fewer losses than those using traditional defensive methods. Vietnam brought new applications. Helicopter door gunners faced ground fire from every direction. Waiting for targets to commit meant waiting to die. Aggressive suppressive fire became standard doctrine. Engage threats before they engage you. The helicopter gunners of Vietnam never knew Michael Donovan's name, but they practiced his principles every day. Modern warfare has moved beyond manned defensive gun positions. Automated systems handle most aerial defense now. But the Donovan Doctrine principles persist in unexpected places. Cyber defense teams practice preemptive engagement against threats still forming. Financial security systems attack vulnerabilities before hackers can exploit them. Even autonomous vehicle safety protocols incorporate aggressive defensive responses to potential collisions. The mathematics remain the same. 20 rounds preventing an attack cost less than 2,000 rounds responding to one. Prevention through initiative beats reaction through desperation. Total impact across 8 decades defies precise calculation. Military historians estimate that aggressive defensive principles, traced directly to Donovan's original doctrine, have influenced tactics employed in over 40 nations. The concepts have been translated into 17 languages. They have been taught at military academies on every inhabited continent. They have saved an estimated 50,000 lives across all conflicts since World War II. One street fighter from South Boston. One idea everyone called suicidal. 50,000 lives across 80 years. But the true lesson was never about technique. The deeper meaning of Donovan's story lies not in tactics, but in something more fundamental about how innovation happens. Consider what Donovan was: a 22-year-old sergeant with no formal military education, a man whose instructors called him too aggressive and recommended him for ground duty, someone who had never read a tactics manual before he started breaking every rule those manuals contained. The military establishment had spent 2 years developing defensive gunnery doctrine. Experts had analyzed thousands of combat engagements. They had consulted engineers and psychologists and statisticians. They had produced training programs endorsed by generals and approved by war departments. And all of it was wrong. Not because the experts were stupid, because they asked the wrong question. They asked, how do we survive fighter attacks? Donovan asked, how do we prevent fighter attacks from happening? Different questions produced different answers. The experts optimized for reaction. Donovan optimized for prevention. His solution seemed obvious in retrospect. Of course hitting first is better than hitting back. Of course psychological disruption is more efficient than physical destruction. Of course initiative beats response. But obvious solutions only seem obvious after someone demonstrates them. Before Donovan, every expert in the 8th Air Force missed what one street fighter understood instinctively. This pattern repeats throughout history. The greatest innovations often come from outsiders who ask questions insiders never consider. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed for proving that aircraft could sink battleships. John Boyd was ostracized for developing energy maneuverability theory that revolutionized fighter combat. Percy Spencer accidentally discovered microwave cooking while working on radar. Outsiders see what insiders cannot because they are not blinded by existing assumptions. Donovan never read the defensive gunnery manual. He did not know what was supposed to be impossible. So he did the impossible anyway. The lesson applies far beyond military tactics. Every institution, every industry, every organization faces the same challenge. Experts accumulate knowledge. Knowledge becomes doctrine. Doctrine becomes assumption. Assumption becomes blindness. And somewhere, an outsider with no formal training asks a simple question that no expert thought to ask. The answers change everything. What suicidal ideas are being dismissed today? What innovations are being rejected because they violate accepted doctrine? What outsiders are being told they are too aggressive, too reckless, too dangerous? Somewhere right now, someone like Michael Donovan is being recommended for ground duty. And one final detail about this story has remained hidden for decades. In 2003, the National Archives declassified a collection of personal correspondence from 8th Air Force personnel. Among the thousands of letters was a small bundle tied with faded ribbon. They were letters Michael Donovan had written but never sent. Letters to the families of his graduates who died in combat. 23 letters total, each one handwritten. Each one explaining what their son or husband or brother had learned, what they had accomplished, how their sacrifice had meaning. Donovan had composed these letters between October 1944 and May 1945. He had kept them in a footlocker for 54 years. After his death, his daughter found them while sorting his possessions. She donated them to the archives without reading them. She said her father had never talked about the war, and she respected his silence. But historians who examined the letters discovered something remarkable. Donovan had tracked every single one of his 300 graduates. He knew which ones survived. He knew which ones died. He knew the circumstances of every death. He had memorized dates and locations and missions. For 54 years, he carried that knowledge in silence. The letters revealed something else. Donovan had calculated that his doctrine saved approximately 3,000 American lives. But he never calculated how many German pilots died because of tactics he taught. In one letter, written but never sent, he confessed that he sometimes wondered about the German families who lost sons because of what he created. He wrote that victory meant someone else's defeat, that survival meant someone else's death, that he had spent 2 years teaching young Americans to kill more efficiently, and the weight of that never left him. This was why Michael Donovan stopped talking about the war. This was why he declined interviews and avoided reunions. Not because he was modest, because he understood something that statistics and medals could never capture. He had changed the mathematics of survival. And mathematics does not care which side you are on. From a street kid who learned to fight in South Boston alleys, to the most feared tail gunner in the 8th Air Force, to a quiet man who built houses and raised children and never spoke about the war. Michael Donovan proved that the best ideas sometimes come from the people everyone dismisses. He proved that aggression and initiative can defeat superior numbers. He proved that psychology matters as much as firepower. In 2 minutes, on March 6, 1944, he destroyed 15 German fighters. In the months that followed, he trained 300 gunners who changed aerial combat forever. And across 80 years, the principles he developed have saved an estimated 50,000 lives in conflicts spanning from Korea to the present day. All because one sergeant refused to accept what the experts told him was impossible. If you know another story like this, a moment when one person's crazy idea changed history, share it in the comments below. The Second World War produced hundreds of innovations that seemed insane until they worked. This channel exists to tell those stories, to remember the men and women who looked at impossible problems and found solutions nobody else could see. Subscribe to discover more forgotten history, because somewhere in the archives, another Michael Donovan is waiting to be remembered. And the final truth of this story is simple enough to fit in a single sentence. Michael Donovan spent 4 minutes destroying 15 enemy aircraft, changed warfare forever, saved 50,000 lives across 8 decades, and the only thing he wanted anyone to remember was the 300 gunners who learned to hit first. That is the measure of a man who understood that real heroes never think of themselves as heroes. They think of everyone they tried to save.